We're paying attention to the Texas gerrymandering. We're paying attention to the tariffs. We're paying attention to the Epstein files and the latest in the Ghislaine Maxwell debacle. But we're also paying attention here at the Katie Phang News Channel to Alligator Alcatraz and the latest developments there. Not only the legal developments, but just the human developments there. Or maybe it's the lack of humanity. Partially because Alligator Alcatraz is being held up and touted by the Trump administration and Kristi Noem at the Department of Homeland Security as kind of the gold standard to be able to emulate and to replicate in other places like Arizona, Nebraska, Louisiana. We know that Fort Bliss in Texas is already being used to detain immigrants. We also know that Governor Greg Abbott has pledged to build the largest immigrant detention facility in the Trump administration. It is a race to the bottom for these people. They have no souls. They are soulless ghouls. But even just yesterday, Kristi Noem announcing the, quote, Speedway Slammer in Indiana. The capabilities of holding 1,000 detainees at a maximum security prison. I want you to stop for a second and think about this. Ghislaine Maxwell, convicted child sex predator, convicted child sex trafficker, convicted child sex abuser. She's not even at a maximum security prison. In fact, she got special dispensation to go to a minimum security camp where you could just walk off. You can go on work release. But more than 70% of the immigrants that are currently in custody, in detention, courtesy of the Trump administration, they have no criminal history. But we're going to put them at a maximum security prison in Indiana because Kristi Noem wants to be able to call it in a cutesy way, in a kitschy way, quote, the Speedway Slammer. It's disgusting, the dehumanization of people. We know that there's an Alligator Alcatraz hunger strike right now because of the inhumane conditions at that facility. It's a concentration camp, people. It meets all the definitions of a concentration camp. And we have people that are being shipped out in ambulances because of the hunger strike and because of the conditions there. And just yesterday, the local NBC affiliate, NBC6 here in South Florida, it had a former corrections officer who was working at Alligator Alcatraz. Her name is Lindsay. I want you to take a listen right now to the way that she describes the conditions at Alligator Alcatraz. She witnessed them firsthand. She experienced them firsthand. She lived them firsthand. But I want you to listen very carefully to the way that she describes the conditions for the detainees that are at Alligator Alcatraz. Take a listen.
While Lindsay knew she was going to be living in a shared trailer, she says the conditions were rough for everyone there.
We had to use the porta-johns. We didn't have hot water half the time. Our bathrooms were backed up.
Shut it down! Shut it down! NBC6 has reported similar accounts from advocates, detainees, and their families.
It looked like an oversized dog kennel.
She says each tent had 8 large cages.
Each pod holds 35 to 38 inmates. They have bunk beds in them.
Do the math, and that means each tent holds close to 300 detainees.
They have no sunlight. There's no clock in there. They don't even know what time of the day it is. They shower every other day or every 4 days. The bathrooms are backed up because you got so many people using them.
On rainy days, she says, the water pours into the tents. She described the conditions as miserable. Not to forget the constant battle with mosquitoes.
Not everybody there is a criminal.
NBC6 News has asked the state for a list of detainees at Alligator Alcatraz, but has not received it. Last month, a Human Rights Watch report found nearly 72% of people detained had no criminal history.
These people are still human. You've pulled them from their livelihood. They're scared. They don't speak our language.
Detainees being held in large dog kennels, 300 detainees per tent, no sunlight, backed up toilets, urine and feces on the floor, flooding from the rain, which is, by the way, normal. Summer rain, summer storms in South Florida, they're like tsunamis. They are like torrential downpours, and that's normal. And there's that kind of flooding. I mean, I could go on and on, but you heard from Lindsay. You heard how she described what's happening at Alligator Alcatraz. So what's being done? As I sit here today, there is a continued court hearing that is happening in federal court in Miami in the Southern District of Florida. It is one of 2 lawsuits that have been brought concerning Alligator Alcatraz. The one that is going on right now is before a federal judge by the name of Kathleen Williams. She's the former federal public defender in the Southern District of Florida. If you recognize her name, I covered her and her courage and her defense of the rule of law when I was talking about how she held in contempt the current Florida Attorney General, James Utmeyer, for his failure to abide by a court order concerning an immigration law in the state of Florida that was deemed to be unconstitutional. So Judge Williams right now is conducting a second day of a hearing. And which lawsuit is it? It's the one that I've also covered. It is the one that is being brought by the environmental organizations. And specifically, it is being brought by the Friends of the Everglades and the Center for Biological Diversity. That lawsuit was filed on June 27th. If you also follow me on Substack, I did a Substack live with the lawyer, one of the lawyers that represents the Friends of the Everglades. That lawsuit is the fact that prior to the construction of Alligator Alcatraz, the state of Florida failed to obtain, as well as the federal government, frankly, failed to obtain the requisite pass to be able to do so because there's existing federal environmental laws that require you to determine the impact on the environment before you are going to build something like Alligator Alcatraz. Because it's in the middle of the Big Cypress National Preserve, it's in the middle of the Everglades, and there's all sorts of ecological harm, biological diversity harm that could happen. And so that's the reason why you need to make sure that you do the necessary studies, none of which were done. It was just erected kind of, in the dead of night. Now, according to the state of Florida, they're saying that because this concentration camp is a state-run facility, the federal regulations regarding the environment do not apply. But here's where it gets very kind of wonky. And just like in the other lawsuit that I'm going to talk about in a second, which was brought by the ACLU on behalf of the detainees because they can't get contact with their lawyers, the Judge Williams, has been saying, okay, this is a state facility, but it has federal immigration detainees. You'll remember, we've talked about this. When you have federal immigration law, that trumps anything dealing with state stuff when it deals with these immigrants. And so here's the confusion. You have a state-run facility run by the Florida Department of Emergency Management. And remember, it's $450 million in Florida state funds that are being used to construct and implement and run this concentration camp. But it's holding federal immigration detainees. And every time a judge like Judge Williams is asking, well, show me the agreement. What's this agreement binding between the state of Florida and the Trump administration as the federal government that dictates who does what, who runs what, whose authority is being applied to be able to do this facility? And it's crickets. There's no production of documents. There's no explanation that's being given. And so these environmental groups that are suing are saying, Judge, we need this clarity. We need to know what the hell is going on here, because according to the defendants, they're saying, oh, no, we don't have to deal with federal laws dealing with the environment because we're not a federal run facility. They're playing fast and loose. And the judge isn't stupid here. She smells the bullshit and then she's sussing it out for what it is. But still, this is a part of the legal process that is happening. So the reason why there's another day of a hearing today is the judges continue to take testimony about this because these environmental groups are seeking a preliminary injunction. They want the cessation of continued construction and running of things at the concentration camp called Alligator Alcatraz. There's also an argument that's being raised by the state of Florida. They're saying that the lawsuit shouldn't have been brought in the Southern District of Florida, that it actually should have been brought in the Middle District of Florida. So let's take a second here. The state of Florida is divvied up into the Northern District, the Middle, and the Southern for purposes of federal court. And this area called Alligator Alcatraz, it's dealing with an airstrip, right? And a portion of that area is in Miami-Dade County, and a portion of that airstrip is in Collier County. Miami-Dade County would be in the Southern District of Florida. Collier County would be in the Middle District of Florida. So the defendants in the environmental lawsuit are trying to play fast and loose when it comes to venue. They're saying, you can't sue us here in the Southern District of Florida. We need to be in the Middle District. Well, and that's, of course, what do we know? They're judge shopping too, right? They don't want to be in front of Judge Williams, who's already busted their balls in other ways about other things. And so that's part of the arguments that are being addressed in the hearing that's going on. There's also that second lawsuit that we're going to get into in a second here, but I want to make sure that we understand kind of the entirety of the legal issues from this environmental lawsuit. So there's also the pursuit in that environmental lawsuit of not only the cessation of that, but the requirement that the state of Florida and the federal government make sure that they've not only complied with all of the federal regs that they have to do, but that they're also complying with any necessary state things. And there's also a big question as to whether or not the invocation of all of these emergency powers makes sense. The fact that the governor claims that because there's a state of emergency due to, quote, illegal immigration, that he's allowed to invoke his emergency powers to be able to do the things that he's doing right now with this concentration camp. But the biggest question that's going on is, what is the relationship? Where's the legal agreement that exists between the state and the federal government to allow this to even take place in the first place? Now, after that environmental lawsuit was filed, we then got a second lawsuit that was done. And this was filed on July 16th. And this was a lawsuit brought by the ACLU and other plaintiffs. And this lawsuit was saying the following. There's a whole bunch of people that are being detained at that concentration camp, and they have zero opportunity to be able to meet with their lawyers. It is a black box at Alligator Alcatraz. Black box of information, black box of contact. And we don't know, as the lawyers, the immigration lawyers, where are we supposed to be filing motions for bond hearings? Where are we supposed to be filing petitions to be able to get in front of courts? Because every time these lawyers have tried to do this, they're told, nope, talk to the federal government. Nope, talk to the state. We have nothing to do with it. But it's intentional, right? I mean, it kind of makes you wonder. It's either a really egregious Keystone Cops moment where they truly are so dumb that they don't know who's doing what. It's like a who's on first moment, but in a really tragic way. Or they are trying to pretend to be ignorant about it so that they can just punt responsibility back and forth until eventually this happens. You end up in court and you get another good judge who says, no, I need to see what is going on here. So that second lawsuit involving the ACLU was in front of another federal judge in the Southern District of Florida. His name is Rodolfo Ruiz. He keeps on asking the government's attorney, who has legal authority over Alligator Alcatraz? And at the last hearing, just a couple of weeks ago, this is what the answer was. Quote, I'm not prepared to say what our position is. We have an idea, but I need to confirm it. I want to take a small point of personal privilege here. I would be humiliated as a lawyer to go to court and I would tell a federal judge of all people that I don't have the answer. Now, it's one thing to say, I'm not familiar with this legal concept or whatever, but when a judge asks you a basic fundamental question about the existing legal relationship on who is running a concentration camp in the middle of the Everglades that is causing this much national, international attention, you mean to tell me, as the lawyer for the government, you can't answer that question? I think the answer is you can answer that question. You're just choosing not to, which means you are just as complicit as the lawyer, as the client, as the person that you're representing, as the agency that you're representing. You are what I call an enabler. And the enablers as the lawyers are just as bad as the bad actors that they're representing. Just as bad. So, Judge Ruiz ordered by today, in his case, he wanted to make sure that he got a look at what is called the 287G agreements between Florida and the federal government. 287G agreements are the ones that are the cooperation and the assistance that is provided by the state and local and municipal organizations or jurisdictions, to the federal government to help them in their immigration efforts. And in Florida, and I'm going to do a really detailed Substack on this written, and then I'll do an accompanying video here on YouTube to walk through it. But essentially, Florida, because it's being run by DeSantis, it obviously has an incredibly stringent and draconian view of the 287Gs. But these 287G agreements should be executed, and they should be the things that are driving that relationship between the state, local, and municipal jurisdictions, law enforcement, et cetera, agencies, and the federal government. And yet, mysteriously, we still don't see a 287G agreement concerning Alligator Alcatraz. So, the judge, Ruiz, keeps on asking, who is running this facility? Quote, who is running the show? And there is no response that is clear that is being given by the state of Florida, even really from the federal government. So the next in-person court hearing for the ACLU lawsuit is coming up on August 18th. But I want to just underscore, you have the environmental lawsuit, and then this ACLU lawsuit deals with the fact that more than 100-something detainees have already been deported already from Alligator Alcatraz. No contact with their lawyers, no bond hearings, no ability to file bond petitions. And so the lawsuit alleges a violation of the First Amendment rights and the due process rights of these detainees that are a part of this lawsuit that was filed by the ACLU. The ACLU is also seeking class certification, that class action, the certification of an entire class to be able to continue in its litigation against the federal government. I appreciate how y'all want to continue to know about this, because I read your comments, I hear from you, and I'm always concerned about whether there is something of value that I am providing to you in these videos that we're doing. And the reason why I take the time to be able to do this is I want you to understand that there are so many nuanced things going on in court that run the gamut from just who the judge is that gets the assigned case, to the lawyers that are representing the parties, to the issues, to the public pressure campaigns, to just kind of the procedural status of these cases. They seem to move so slowly, and I get it, and sometimes the wheels of justice grind slowly. But this is where a lot of the battles are being fought right now, and that's in court, which is why we can't have a defeatist or a fatalist attitude about us going to court and maybe, not having compliance or not having the right thing done. We need to continue to use the judicial system as an institution, as a place where the rule of law is supposed to exist. We have to continue to use our judicial system for its purpose. And I'm biased because I'm a lawyer. I'm a trial lawyer. I'm somebody who goes to court, and I do these battles in court. But it's this opportunity to be able to force the Trump administration to have to own up to what is happening here. And I do think everything was so hastily done at this concentration camp that they really don't know they don't really know, but that's not a fucking excuse, okay? It's not an excuse. The incompetence of the Trump administration and the incompetence and stupidity of Kristi Noem, footnote, if you haven't seen the South Park episode about her, you just run and go watch it. But the incompetence and the stupidity collectively of the Trump administration, Kristi Noem and others, is not an excuse to violate the due process rights of immigrants. And it's certainly not an excuse to be able to put those immigrants whose due process rights are being violated in inhumane conditions at a concentration camp in the middle of the Everglades. And it is certainly not an excuse to hide behind your incompetence and your stupidity to evade accountability in court, especially when federal judges are pressing you to answer the questions as to who in the hell is running the show at Alligator Alcatraz. So my hat off to not only the ACLU, but lawyers like Scott Hyacin in that environmental case for the Friends of the Everglades. These are people that are saying, not on my watch, we're not going to stand by idly and watch our United States Constitution get destroyed by people like Kristi Noem. So I'm going to report back to you guys once I know the details of what happens, not only in the continued hearing for the environmental impact case, but also what happens today with some of the filings that are going to happen in the ACLU case about who is really having the authority to run and operate and to deal with the concentration camp called Alligator Alcatraz that's in the Everglades. I'll see you on the other side. Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.